Hey there, friends. Are some of you guys planning on doing something crazy leading up to or around Election Day? Federal government thinks you are. First, guys, go check out my friends Attorneys on Retainer. These guys are not an insurance company as far as carry insurance for your firearm. These are legitimate attorneys who are just what they say. They're on retainer. These guys are ready to answer your call. When you do call, there is an on-call attorney who will take your call. So in the event you have to use your firearm, you are not dancing around with some $12 an hour phone clerk who doesn't know anything about law and doesn't know what it takes to protect you. You will be met with an attorney on the other line. Sign up now with my friends Attorneys on Retainer for optimum protection, and in the unlikely event you have to draw your carry firearm in self-defense, use my code FTATF and receive $50 off your individual sign-up fee. That's Attorneys on Retainer. This is a new story that I ran across, and to me, it's a bit of a dog whistle to not only law enforcement, but people in general, to point a misguided finger at conservatives because of the way that they not only package this message, but watch the way they end this news report.
Intelligence agencies are warning of threats of violence in the upcoming election. In a joint intelligence bulletin, agents from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are warning law enforcement agencies that domestic violent extremists are seeking to terrorize and disrupt the vote. Let's get more now from NBC's Ken Delanian. What more can you tell us about this warning, Ken?
Good morning, Anna. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are warning in this new intelligence bulletin of the heightened risk of lone wolf attacks by domestic extremists motivated by election-related conspiracy theories, including beliefs in widespread voter fraud and their hatred of their political opponents. This will surprise no one who's been paying attention, but it's significant that these agencies are putting this out to local law enforcement a week before the election. The new unclassified bulletin says the goal of these attacks would be to terrorize and disrupt the vote. And to be clear, this document does not describe intelligence about any specific threat. It talks about a general atmosphere of anger and misinformation that could prompt unstable people to engage in threats or violence. And of course, we've already seen that in recent weeks with a series of arrests for election threats, including a man in Philadelphia who allegedly threatened to skin election workers alive. And remember last week, police in Phoenix arrested a person in connection with a mailbox fire that damaged around 20 ballots. The report identified potential targets of violence to include candidates, elected officials, election workers, members of the media, and judges involved in election cases. The potential threats include physical attacks and violence at polling places, ballot drop boxes, voter registration locations, and rallies and campaign events. And of course, Anna, the report doesn't say this, but it's obvious that a lot of these extremists are driven by years of lies about the election, 2020 election, by Donald Trump and his allies.
You catch that? So the entire report, including what was delivered from the FBI and from Department of Homeland Security, again, two agencies that need to be gutted when and if Donald Trump wins, because of Christopher Wray and Alejandro Mayorkas need to go. They are part of the problem. They are cancers to the general public. And to me, they make our general public extremely unsafe because of the open border and the things they allow to happen because they are so politically driven. But I digress. These people use the buzzwords lone wolf attacks, which, first of all, lone wolf attacks, I don't believe in lone wolf attacks very often. I rarely do. And guys, if this is on such a large of a scale that the FBI and Department of Homeland Security felt like they needed to put a report out, do you honestly think there's only one or two people out there? I mean, really, for something to wind up on the radar of the FBI and the DHS, is it honestly just one or two little random people out there wanting to do something? I mean, if it were an overarching problem, wouldn't it be more than just some hidden memo kind of pointing the finger at conservatives, conspiracy theorists? I mean, to me, I think this is more of an attack on free speech to make you shut up about questioning things than it is an actual warning about something that might actually happen. But the lone wolf attack thing, that's overused. That's simply overused, and I think that's their way to make it look like, hey, we don't have any real details here, so we're going to say it's a lone wolf attack because we can't put our finger on this massive problem because it's so widespread and so small based on the individuals with the, quote, lone wolf attacks. And it talks about hatred of political opponents. Guys, have you ever seen a party with so much hate in their hearts as the Democrat Party. I know they tried to repackage themselves to call it joy because honestly they had to. They had to say they were running a campaign on joy because it was clearly based on hate. You know, sometimes you have to repackage things because they are so obvious that people are like, our campaign's being run on hate. Like the Democrats were recognizing that their campaign was simply driven by the hatred of Donald Trump, the other campaign. So they said, I know what we can do. Let's make the dummies out there think that we're joyous. Even though we're going to call Donald Trump a Nazi, we're doing it with a joyful voice because we want the world to come together. This is the most divisive group of people I've ever seen in my whole life. I thought Barack Obama was divisive. This group of radical Democrats right now are the most divisive I've ever seen in my life. There's nothing that you can do that doesn't fall in lockstep with them that they don't get angry about and want to lash out physically. If you don't agree with every single thing that they agree with, they don't accept any differing opinions. But they can say what they want about hatred of political opponents. Honestly, guys, I mean, you tell me in the comments down below. Do you hate the other side? I mean, let's be real here, and I'm telling you kind of how I feel, right? Hate is a pretty strong word. There's probably, if I really had to put my finger on it, there's probably some people that I hate. Boy, wouldn't you like to hear what they've done, right? But hate, the one politician I dislike more than anybody because he started the divisiveness, and I truly believe he was simply elected based on race alone, is Barack Obama. I can't stand the guy, but I don't hate him. I don't know him. You know what I mean? I don't know the guy. These people hate Donald Trump. Like they see that. Like when they sweat, there's hate that comes out of their pores. They hate this man so much. I mean, it is a mental problem with them. Like the girl that you saw yelling at the toddler the other day. That's something wrong with these people, man. I mean, they genuinely hate Donald Trump. So let's quit trying to say both sides hate equally. They don't. This clown also mentioned that the people in danger are candidates, elected officials, election workers, members of the media, and judges regarding election-type cases. Now, I found that really interesting because they specifically name a lot of the people who would actually be involved in larger-scale election fraud. So this looks like an attempt to put a report out like this in the more obvious places where election fraud could take place to try to deter people like us who are genuinely good people to not look. In other words, these are places where you would witness and see and possibly video and record. Remember they were hiding all these windows before? Why? Why would you want to hide something if you have nothing to hide? I've always thought that. So they're naming the people who are supposedly in danger from these lone wolves as the very people who would be the ones looking the other way or taking part in election fraud. Again, I think that's to scare you away from poll watching or recording, videoing the obvious or the questionable things that might be taking place and go, that doesn't look right. It's their way of saying, don't put yourself in those places so we won't consider you a lone wolf or come after you. I mean, look at January 6th. There were people who did nothing wrong who were still rotting in jail just because somebody decided to arrest you. This is their way of saying, we warned you, there's lone wolves out there. So now when you go to an area like a poll worker or somebody like that who might be bringing in a luggage full of absentee ballots, now this is a way to scare you or at least make you think, man, maybe I really shouldn't go to that back door where that person's bringing that luggage full of absentee ballots in. Because, I mean, I don't want to be considered a domestic terrorist. And, you know, I don't want to go to jail for taking a picture of something. They're trying to scare you into not looking out for election integrity. And, of course, this guy being an affiliate with NBC had to throw his own little nugget of obvious information in there by stating that the report doesn't say this, but it's obvious that, and then he mentions that tied to Donald Trump, right?
And of course, Anna, the report doesn't say this, but it's obvious that a lot of these extremists are driven by years of lies about the election, 2020 election by Donald Trump
He's referencing a report to give his story credibility and then turning right around and saying, now the report doesn't say this, but it's obvious based on my opinion that this is why all this is happening, even though the FBI or DHS do not technically name a political party or political leaning, although we know what they're setting up based on what I just explained. Now, one thing I do want to point out for the people out there on the left who are the negative Nancys that say, oh, there's no such thing as voter fraud. I'd like to remind you that the U.S. Supreme Court said in 2008 in Crawford versus Marion County Election Board, quote, flagrant examples of such fraud have been documented throughout the nation's history by respected historians and journalists, demonstrate that not only is voter fraud real, but that it could affect the outcome of a close election. 2020 was a close election. Think I'm lying? I'm going to post this link for you guys to take a look at it yourself from the Heritage Foundation. Oh yeah, it's that evil Heritage Foundation, right? Yes, this is a conservative place, but you know what's funny about conservatives? They usually bring the receipts. They do in this case. This is something they have on their website. It's a pretty interesting database and map called a sampling of recent election fraud cases from across the United States. At the very bottom, you see it's got 1,561 proven instances of voter fraud, 1,325 criminal convictions, and 58 civil penalties. And of course, they have some other things down there, diversion program, judicial findings, and official findings. Now, what's important about this is that these are, when you look at the 1,561, that's proven instances. When I say proven instances, these are situations where people were convicted. These were not pictures of somebody that were caught initiating voter fraud or taking part in it. This is not supposition. This is not somebody saying, hey, I have pretty good idea that this person committed fraud. These are people who were convicted, like they got a charge on this. This is not 1,561 people who have only their individual areas. These are people who were caught, and it could have been multiple instances of fraud per person. So don't think that in the history of the United States there's only been 1,500 cases. No, my friend, this is very, very recent, since 2020-ish, in the early 2000s, that this database started collecting this. And again, these are convictions. In many cases, prosecutors and judges, not only they won't hear these cases, but they will not prosecute these cases. So depending on the area you live in and the type of progressive activist judges that might be in your area, it's very possible the DA and the judges simply won't even look at these cases of voter fraud. They have no interest in them whatsoever. Now, if you go to their map, I chose Arizona because Arizona, if you remember, that was kind of a hot button issue in the 2020 election. It was called super early. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Arizona that had, well, let me not make, I don't want to do what the Democrats do. Obviously, you guys know there were areas, somebody had a mystery pipe that burst in from the city that no one has a record of, that they shut down the people who were counting the votes at 3 a.m. in the morning, and then people showed back up at 3:30 or whatever. I mean, there's so many different weird instances. The people with the luggage where they brought in all the ballots that mysteriously all of a sudden showed up at one time. Arizona was definitely a hot button issue during that election. Now, what I did is I went and looked at some of the Arizona ones. And there's quite a few, actually. This is a little surprising to me. But the interesting thing, and this is so typical, guys. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're all used to. But it's actually funny to me when you see it in action. I went and chose a lot of these to look at because I wanted to get general information about what type of voter fraud that we were experiencing. This particular one was one of them that I pulled up, Tracy K. McKee. I want you to notice something that's very funny. Tracy K. McKee of Scottsdale was indicted by a grand jury on one count of illegal voting and one count of perjury. McKee, a registered Republican, cast a ballot in the name of her deceased mother. That's what I wanted you to see. A registered Republican. This is their way of saying, see, Republicans cheat too. You know what's funny? This was literally the only case where they said what their party affiliation was. None of the other instances that I've pulled up had anything to do with Democrat or Republican. So these people stumbled across a Republican who actually did falsify or at least fraudulently cast a vote, and they got lucky. Blind squirrel got a nut. Now they were able to say, see, it's a problem on both sides, so quit blaming us. But yeah, most of the other ones, all of the other ones, did not name a political party in any kind of way. Guys, this is a setup, if I ever saw one. This is one of those situations where they're, again, trying to intimidate you and scare you away from poll watching and watching the things and reporting on those things and taking video and pictures of the things that don't make sense, that look a little screwy. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking that you are the problem. If you feel like you see something that needs to be reported upon, do it. If you've done nothing wrong, you've done nothing wrong. You're not burning the place down. You're not harassing these people. You know, if you're not breaking the law, they've got nothing on you. So don't let them intimidate you into calling out what needs to be called out on. One thing I want to say in closing, this clown in this MSNBC story went to great pains to make it sound like this is just all a figment of everybody's imagination of a voter fraud, and obviously he insinuated that it all came from the right, and that it was a huge conspiracy theory based on stuff Donald Trump had said. I want to be really clear in my closing comments, and really short. This report, this story by this guy and this network on MSNBC, that is the real conspiracy theory.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
He's over.